So thank you all for coming. Now, so look, what we'll do first is I might just direct some questions to the panel first, and then we're going to open it up. So if you've got some questions, start thinking those up, and we'll start pointing. I'll start pointing, and we'll take the microphone towards you. So we do have some microphones there. So Ian,
yep.
I'll start with you first, because it's quite interesting, because I have sometimes, I mean, obviously from a doctor's point of view, if I start talking about wasted resources, it almost looks like I'm rationing resources, and I feel like I sound like a really heartless soul. But I must say that you've actually been a strong advocate for that, because I want to. Do you think it's reasonable to be discussing that? You know,
Well, I think it is. I think it is important to discuss the issue of how we are going to look at it. I mean, my job now is as the Chief Advocate for National Seniors Australia, and we've got a couple 100,000 members, and we've just had a minister today announce that he's going to toughen up regulations to do with aged care, and he's going to have unannounced visits into aged care facilities, and they want to try and improve the pay for people. And so you've got to sit around and say to yourself, well, if there's a limited amount of money that's available, how do you best spend it? And I don't think that there's anything wrong with having a conversation about the fact that $150 million, according to the University of Queensland study last year, was wasted on unnecessarily ICU treatments. We saw, for example, in the examples that we had tonight, that if the families, if we'd said, I want Richard on a respirator, I want him, intubated, I want him fed. I mean, Richard could have spent 3 weeks in ICU with no gain at all, just a great loss to us, because we would have had to watch that, and it would have been a waste of resources. So I mean, I'd like a show of hands. How many people here think that I'm being cruel and unkind by suggesting that we're wasting money? How many people think I'm being rational and sensible? Okay, so there you go. I mean, if you're a doctor, people are reasonable people. You know, if you give people a reason for why you're doing something, they will follow the reasoning. And I think one of the big problems we've got in our society at the moment is that no one actually has reasoned arguments. You know, if you say, well, let's have a look at this. If we spend a lot of money in intensive care units all over Australia as people age, then we won't have money for employing, I don't know, English teachers for migrants. We won't have money for roads. We won't have money. I mean, health is still, I think, the biggest cost to our community. So if we treat it as something special that we have to be very careful about, I think it's a good thing. And that, then the person is actually giving a gift to the community as well. I mean, Richard's gift to the community was, I didn't waste a lot of money at the end of my life.
That's lovely.
And the same thing with Bill, wasn't it? Bill? Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. He'd be one of those people who say, I don't want you wasting money on me.
Well, he's of the generation that says, I don't want to be a financial burden on my family, and I don't want to be a financial burden on the community. So that would absolutely be his view.
And I just want to say while we're here that Karen looked after my sister-in-law. That's a typical Adelaide story, isn't it? And she knows my brother. So there you go. Isn't that wonderful? And I'm glad that she only retired in March and not last March. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had such a lovely person looking after my sister-in-law.
Thank you.
Just make a comment, Ian. I think what you've said is really, really important. I think the conversations about resourcing are not conversations that we can have at a bedside. These are conversations that need to happen in our community. So as clinicians, our primary responsibility is to care for our patients, and I look at it from the point of view of not to inflict unnecessary suffering on people. So we don't ever go into the resource conversation. I think that's really disrespectful to family who are grieving and who want to make sure that they've done everything that's appropriate, because it's, as you pointed out, it's not often the patients that want things done, it's the family members who want to feel that they've done everything for their loved one that they should have.
But I mean,
but
I'm saying having the conversation before you get to hospital. But and you can have the conversation now and say, well, look, you know, does the community think it's worthwhile spending a lot of valuable dollars of intensive care time on people who don't themselves probably even want to be in that situation?
Yeah.
And the only reason they're in there is because you haven't had the discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. And the same conversation happens in my mind around chemotherapy. of which there are more and more and more and more options now with ever hopeful outcomes, and people go down that path increasingly. It's very hard to turn the boat around when it's there in a clinical space, not in a community space.
Could I stay with you for a second, Christine? Alison, when you were talking about that case, I was quite struck because you just said it exactly the way it is. When that chap rang you up again and said you need treatment. And, you know, that was the thought bubble person. You know, they were going through their list of protocols about what's supposed to happen, and they weren't really thinking this one out. And do you understand why the Advanced Care Directive and the substitute decision maker holding the line and actually understanding their role and trying to get back to substitute judgment decision-making standard, which is doing what the individuals wanted, is really where you had to get to. But that person had got out of that mould. Now, the thing about it is that Christine actually has some experience in that, because in Lowell McEwen, she took another role a few years ago where she actually spent quite a lot of time teaching not just palliative care specialists, but other doctors about this, which is not as easy as you think. And look, could I talk to you about what do you think I mean, you've got the situation with explaining to people out there their rights, but then you've got another issue within hospitals about teaching doctors about their rights. What's their sort of understanding about advanced care directives, and what effect did it have when you started to teach them about the legal and ethical aspects, and what it's, you know, because I think there were some figures that showed there were some effects on ICU.
You certainly were.
Sorry,
yeah.
have you got one?
And yeah, not just about ICU, but in general respecting a person's autonomy. That's what our law is all about, and it reflects the values that our society holds in high regard, doesn't it? And it also reflects the complexity of the society we live in, doesn't it? That families are much more complex now than they ever were. Medical interventions and the health system is much more complex. So there has to be something that helps us sort through differing opinions and differing treatments and options. So I think having the Advanced Care Directives is very important from that point of view. And I actually think that with our program of teaching, I went around the whole of the Northern Adelaide Local Health Network in every single clinical space, including Aboriginal health, and I taught people and discussed Advanced Care Directives. And it was really interesting, in particular, going to Aboriginal health and people saying, oh, this is not what we do. You know, this is a voluntary activity. We can't force people to do this. However, this is not what we do in Aboriginal culture. And I said, but we want to get this right. How do we know who we should be talking to? The biggest thing message that I could get across to people was, who would you like to speak on your behalf if you are unable to make a decision for yourself? Regardless of whether that's end of life or not. What if you're under anaesthetic and something changes when the surgeon gets into the operation and needs permission to do something other than what was decided on in the middle of an operation? What happens if you've got a mental illness? You may not be at end of life. This is not just about end of life. How do we know? How do we get it right when we look for somebody to get consent from? So one of the people in the Aboriginal Health Forum, for example, said to me, well, you know, we went through the consent hierarchy, and she said to me, well, this doesn't fit. This is not what I would do. I would expect my daughter, I haven't seen her for 5 years, but it's her bloody job to do this, she said to me. She lives interstate. And I said, well, you need to write that down, because you come into the ED where I work and I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to talk to the wrong person. So please help me understand what the right thing to do is. The other important thing we found around the teaching was that a lot of the doctors, in particular, the junior ones, are the ones who get this job quite often, because the seniors, you think about the surgeons, they're in doing surgery all day long. They're not talking at length to people. It's the junior doctors who get to do it. And it's a highly skilled conversation that they know they can do harm if they do it wrongly. So they really appreciated having some sort of a framework around how to start that conversation. And in your situation, one of the things I would have said for that son who called from interstate was, well, how are we supporting him? He's distressed. He's coming from a point of view of, I've had nothing to do with my mum. I'm angry. I've got to advocate now. How do we actually support him at the same time as getting the right decision happening here for what his mother would have wanted? So, you know, we may not need to get to dispute resolution if we know how to handle that conversation. So that one of the things they found was that it was very, very helpful. And we found doctors, once they'd had some success, then felt that they could have more and more conversations because they were doing it well. We all know if we do something well, we want to do it again. If we do it badly, we avoid it. So that was one of the outcomes. And what we had was more and more resuscitation plans happening, not based on a person's age, but based on their condition and their situation. So that was a really good outcome. And we also had a change in the kinds of patients that were being sent to intensive care. And all I had time to look at were the people who are over 80 years of age, but they were being sent there for different reasons and having better outcomes. So we were no longer sending people with what we call multi-organ failure who have no hope of getting through this. We were sending people who maybe had had a big operation, who might have needed some extra monitoring for the 24 hours. And that's good practice, that's not bad practice. So our patient cohort was changing, and I think that was a really good outcome.
So in many ways, it gets back to what you were saying, Ian, before, that the right people are being treated and the bed wasn't being taken by somebody for which the treatment was of no benefit, but the people that was of benefit that were getting treatment.
And also I just want to mention one other thing. Professor Graham Hugo, the late Professor Graham Hugo, did a study for the Health Department a few years ago, and he actually said that the group that I belong to, that I sit smack in the middle of, as the baby boomers, he said they are 3 times more likely to have comorbidities than their parents. You know, they're actually not. So, you know, there are a lot of people. I mean, Richard didn't have diabetes; he only had COPD. But there are people that have got diabetes and they've got COPD and they've got other issues and they've got, you know, heart problems, heart failure, and all this. So, I mean, there's a big question around. I mean, this idea that we're all going to live well and we're all going to be living to 150 and all that. It's not actually the case. I mean, there is a mixed bag out there.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think you actually have to think about what you're actually doing for the quality of life of those people by taking them in there and this very expensive treatment that is ultimately not going to work.
Well, that's actually a good segue into Karen. I was going to ask you a question. That the next question was, I picked this case particularly because this case was not a cancer situation and pain was not the primary issue, because everybody focuses on pain and cancer being palliative care. But I mean, palliative care, you work in a similar area, I suppose, where movement disorder and swallowing issues are major, breathing issues are major as well, which is motor neuron disease. What ultimately is palliative care to an individual out there? I mean, what is the aim? What are you trying to do? And what can be brought to bear that is of benefit in this situation, including John? I mean, John, you know, because Betty survived in this case, and John's still out there distressed. So what does palliative care offer in this situation?
Well, I guess palliative care really is a concept of care. It's a type of care for people who, you know, have any illness of any, you know, that ultimately at some stage will limit their life. So, you know, what we try to offer people is comfort, relief of, you know, any distressing symptoms, you know, and that doesn't always mean not treating things. And I think that's what a lot of people, you know, don't realise palliative care. They think it means doing nothing, but it actually is quite active care in some situations if it's going to improve the symptoms, that whatever the illness. And, you know, Chris used the example of motor neuron disease, which I've worked in for a long time, and, you know, there are issues around swallowing, breathing, and you know, that's when we have the conversations with people. Okay, you know, when we get to that stage, what treatment would you want, you know, at that point, or what treatment would you not want at that point? That's in you know, with the individual, if that's possible, or as we've been talking about now, the substitute decision maker. So that's why it's really important that that person knows, you know, what you would want in that situation. But I guess it's giving people a range of options and saying, well, this is what we can do, and then, you know, trying to come to some agreement around what's the most appropriate, considering where they are at that point in time.
The other aspect, though, with John in mind, because John is the one out there distressed.
Yeah.
I mean, psychosocial aspects, you know, the psychological and emotional aspects are almost just as important.
I think, you know, I'm a strong advocate for case conferencing. You know, I think it's much better if you can to get everybody in the same room, and if John physically can't be there, it's about getting John on the phone while conversation's taking place with all involved in the care, and that's both the family as well as the health professionals, and, you know, coming to some consensus around what is, you know, the most appropriate way to deal with this, and making sure that John has some opportunity to voice his opinions, to try and reach agreement, you know, be involved in the whole decision-making process, And yeah, it isn't always easy when you do have one family member that's opposing, but I think if everyone's hearing the same conversation at the same time, you've got a much better chance of having an outcome that everyone may not totally agree with, but you know, at least everyone's had the opportunity to be involved in that.
Could I just say that, you know, I was saying before, the Advanced Care Directive, that it's important to write things that you don't want, but it's also important to write things that you do want beyond that. And the reason why this would be relevant in this situation here is that if Betty had written that I really would like all my family to be together on a decision, that might have changed Anne's position. Right? But what if Betty had written, I do not trust John, do not listen to John, because I've seen that before, do not trust him. Well, you know, it might be a different decision. Do you see what I mean? Those extra things actually add value to a decision that gets made. That's why those things about what you just don't want to do is not the only thing. Could I just then go to Lee? We'll talk about Advanced Care Directives and the actual Advanced Care Directive in South Australia. Where do we get one and what do I do with it, basically? What should I be doing with it?
Right. You can buy them from Service SA outlets, or if you put Advanced Care Directive into a search engine, the first item that comes up should be the Advanced Care Directive website. From that website you can download the equivalent of the kits which are around. Plus there's two ways. I might have to get a bit of technical assistance from my colleague over here, but there's two different ways that you can fill it out online. Once you've done that, you need to get your substitute decision makers to sign it if you're going to have substitute decision makers, and then get it witnessed. We recommend that people get certified copies, probably 5 or 6 certified copies, so that substitute decision makers have a copy. You put a copy on the fridge, that you do upload it. Putting one on the fridge is in case the ambulance come and they're instructed to look on the fridge to see if there's any Advanced Care Directives there. If you've got a medical record in one of the hospitals, you can take it in there, get it put with your record. It and the 7-step resuscitation pathway have a special sleeve in the medical record so that, in theory, it's easily found. Probably miss...
It's on EPAS as well.
Yes, it's on...
Yeah. So we can scan the documents into our EPAS. You will have all heard of the EPAS, the wonderful EPAS system. We do scan the documents into that, and an alert comes up on the front page when we call up your medical record to say there's something there, look for it. So that's even can be seen in a resuscitation room if the hospital that you go to is on EPAS. Yeah.
So could I just ask another question, which is about the Advanced Care Directive, because I think it's quite a common one, is what some people out here have the old Advanced Care Directive, the legal documents, which is enduring guardianship, the medical power of attorney, and also the anticipated direction. Where do they stand if they were completed before July 2014, and what happens now? Or do they need to fill out another form? Or?
No, they don't, but if they want to, they can do an Advanced Care Directive. All those documents remain valid, and they'll be treated as an Advanced Care Directive should they be used. So what that means in practice is that some of them were based on the old notion of determining what was the best interests of the person concerned, as opposed to what are the wishes of the person concerned. So those documents will be interpreted from the framework of the Advanced Care Directive Act. So they're still legally valid, that's the main point.
So anybody who's a medical power of attorney or enduring guardian is a substitute decision maker under the Act, and then anybody who's written wishes under anticipatory direction, they're the wishes of an Advanced Care Directive in effect. But what happens if you do complete a new one then? What happens if you've just written an Advanced Care Directive and just written some wishes or refusals on a new Advanced Care Directive, but there's a medical power of attorney out there? What happens to that form?
Is it a valid advanced care directive?
So the previous medical power of attorney was valid, but
Yep.
you've got a new advanced care directive which has been completed but doesn't have a substitute decision maker on it. Was that medical power of attorney valid anymore after the July the 1st?
Yes, it continues to be. So whoever you named there would continue to be, would be your substitute decision maker, and the remaining parts of your advanced care directive would continue to be, would be valid, the new ACD.
Could I now go over to Gaynor? So Gaynor's from the digital agency, Australian Digital Health Agency. So a lot of people have no idea what this is because they get EPAS and My Health Record mixed up in South Australia, and that's not a good thing to get mixed up. But what is My Health Record? How can people get one, and what's happening later this year? And what can people do about their advanced care directives?
Well, My Health Record is basically an electronic summary of your health information, and you can get one by doing, as you say, a search engine, put My Health Record in, and it will take you to the website where you can register for one at the moment. Currently, we're in the process of moving to My Health Record expansion programme, and later this year there will be a period which we're calling opt-out. So if you don't opt out during that period, by the end of this year, every Australian will have a My Health Record created for them. We're one of the first countries on the planet to do this, so yeah, no pressure. So to get you, one thing to remember about it is it's a summary of information that's contained electronically, but each and every one of you are the controllers of that information. So if you don't want something uploaded to your My Health Record, it won't be uploaded. If you want to have, say, Chris see this part of your record, but you'll let Alison see the rest of it, so you can actually hide documents and control who accesses your information. At the moment, we're working with a number of community pharmacies, GPs, hospital services to allow clinicians better access to the record from their own systems. EPAS is going to be having its own tab for the clinicians to access My Health Record from the EPAS. So that's been rolled out, hopefully, to all services within South Australia by the end of this year.
So all My Health Record is, it's pretty, does anybody use, whose computer, into computers, it's Dropbox, or it's just a file up in the sky, so your GP, your pathology people, the x-ray people, the hospitals can just shove stuff up there. It's the same letters that you get there, the discharge summaries and stuff, but the problem is at the moment is it's all stuck in everybody's computers, but this time it's accessible by somebody else. And the whole aim of this was really, so for me, I still get back to yeah, it's about sharing information. See, I think one of the things that I know from your point of view is that you want to make sure that your wishes are out there, but you see, you have to look at it from a health provider's point of view. The power of that information is so much greater if you've got an advanced care directive telling us what you don't want done and what you do want done, but it's linked to your medical history. Because if we know that you've got end-stage lung disease plus you don't want this, makes our decision a lot easier and takes that thought bubble situation out of play a lot more quickly.
I just want to say on that we had the problem where Richard had been in and out of hospital so many times, but when it came to the last time, the advanced care directive document wasn't there, it didn't come in from the nursing home, and we had that, situation of 24 hours. Well, where is it? Why didn't it come in? You've got to go to the nursing home, you've got to get it, you've got to bring it back in, give it to the doctor, call in the palliative care team, and I was very lucky that I had two brothers who were doctors that were doing it. So I'm immensely pleased that, that can now be scanned, put into a record so that you don't have to worry about that as a family at the time. So I think it's brilliant that we're getting it. And I mean, I even said to Chris when I told him the story originally, it should be with your Medicare number. When you go into the hospital and they go swipe or whatever they do with your Medicare card, that number should immediately tell everyone you've got an advanced care directive in the same way as you're an organ donor or whatever else you need. And if that's what's going to happen,
pretty much what it is, actually.
I think it's
So it's
terrific.
actually linked to your Medicare card, but also your other demographic details.
Yeah, but I think it's terrific that that we are in the 21st century. And if we can do all the sorts of things that we can do, then this is a perfect way of doing it and saving a lot of people. I mean, then the doctor doesn't even have to have the discussion. The doctor can actually look at the file and say, right, okay, well, I see what's going on. And they don't even have to ask you. They can say, well, they can tell you, oh, your father, brother, sister has got an advanced care directive.
I mean, from my point of view, as I've been an oncology nurse for many years, so this futile chemotherapy business, I'm so with you there. There's a lot of now nurse care coordinators out there who spend hours on the phone trying to find out where Betty had her last pathology results, which they don't need to stick her again, or trying to find out which GP they've been using this month because they're doing a bit of travelling. This is going to be a real lifesaver for them, because it's the people with chronic disease that are seeing multiple providers. This is going to make a huge difference.
I mean, when it first comes out, it's not going to be perfect. It's
not.
going to go opt-out latency. And the reason why Judith had a lot of trouble was that she had to register for it. So that's what we're trying to get to, that you don't have to register for it, but you can just get yourself off it easily if you don't want. Because, yeah.
I mean, and the other thing to remember that you're, because it's linked to Medicare, if you're an organ donor, that'll be up there. All the immunisation records will be up there, so they automatically flow over from all the Medicare information as well.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, this project is,
It's huge.
It's a Snowy River, project. It's huge. The health system's huge, and we're trying to build something huge there. Look.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
Advanced care directives are not necessarily static these days, in that people's situations change. So I'll give you an example. My brother had one, and when he was divorced, his wife was no longer his STM, so he wrote new documents. So the other important thing is to make sure that if you do change your documents, that they get into the system in the most current form, because the risk then is that we, in the health system, are looking at the wrong documents and going to the wrong people. The same thing's happened with my father, that we've changed who is his SDM, and we've had to go back to the hospitals and back into the health system to say, look, he's got an updated one. Just be aware, I think, because as I was talking about before, the complexity of our lives means that things change. Yeah.
Yes, that's really true. Look, we might now take some questions from the crowd. I think Heather had a question first. Is that right, Heather? Might just give one to Heather first, and then I'll hand some.
My name's Heather Allinson. I've just been doing some research in South Australia on what happens when you present an advanced care directive to hospitals. So I've just got some questions, please, just that are really practical, maybe for Karen and Christine and yourself, Chris. People appointing a substitute decision maker is not necessarily a family member. Often it's your friend that you trust or you have a great relationship with, and family dynamics around that are really complicated. So the message is to do it early and consider it early, but I think people should also communicate and talk about that it's not necessarily family that is a substitute decision maker. And my other thing is just a question. In the current advanced care directive form, it has a section around what's important to me and what are my values. From what I understand, that's really critical from the health professional's point of view to understand that. One of the practices of lawyers is to cross all of those pages out. So I'm just wondering if you can please comment on that, given that you've got a crowd of a lot of community people here.
I'll deal with the substitute. Oh, sorry.
I'm happy to comment on that.
Okay, yeah, go, Lee.
You can do your own advanced care directive. Some people, when they go to a lawyer to get their wills done, they offer to do them. What Heather said is absolutely correct. This has come back to us, that they're often, people have found that the same information has been put into a number of ACDs. So I don't think, that they've necessarily taken the time to go through and speak with the person and really find out what it is that's important to them and what they want. So I think really, if you can, do it yourself. If you need some help, there are various places that can help you with that. I think lawyers seem to have a slightly different headset about the process, but what you've said, Heather, is what we've been told as well.
I was going to say on that, I agree with that. The document's about you. It's not a legal document. It is a legal document, but it's not supposed to be a legal document. It's you. Okay. The other thing is that getting back to your first question, absolutely. I do not believe that it has to be a family member. Part of advanced care planning that happens with me is when I have somebody, a family in there, and we're actually determining who's going to be the substitution maker, I'm actually explaining to them their responsibility. They have to be able to make the decision that their loved one wanted. And sometimes they balk at that point, and that's fine. If they are, then they're probably not the right person. So I think that's the thing, not necessarily the one that loves you the most, it's actually the one that is able, that you trust to actually follow through on the decision. That's not being horrible about it, but just some people just can't make those decisions because it's just too hard a decision. Kathy, I'll let...
What happens if it comes to the crunch time and the substitute decision maker actually says, no, actually, I want to ignore what's in the Advanced Care Directive, do everything? What if they go against that?
Well, let's go down there. Well, remember the whole principle of the Act. If I'm in the crunch time, the principle of the Act is that you must always do what the patient would have wanted. Now, they probably would have some other wishes there, and I'd be asking them why what they're saying is inconsistent with the wishes, right? I'd be asking them that. And if I'm unhappy about that, I would go to the public advocate. But let me explain to you what I mean about writing stuff that matters to you. If the individual wrote, I'll give you an example. This is one that happens quite often. Somebody has had slow bleeding lesion that's going on for years. They've had enough. They've had enough. They've had their 40th transfusion. They've really had enough, okay? They know they're going to die if they don't have another transfusion. Okay, so they've written on there, no more transfusions, but my family is really important to me. That's that section you wrote about, what is important to me. My family is really important to me. And then they become unconscious, but the substitution maker comes up to me and says, can you please give them one more transfusion? And I'll say, why? And they'll go, it's because their son is flying over from London at the moment to see them one more time. And I'll go, Reed, it's consistent with their wishes. And I would be comfortable with doing that at that point. Do you see why that order is there? Yeah. And that's why it works. And that's the reality of it. That's why it's important just as much to write the things that are important to you than the things you don't want done to you. Sorry. I'll go right there. I think that was the question there. My apologies if we'll work our way through.
My name's Bob. I'm a Justice of the Peace, and I belong to the Royal Association of Justices. And I'm pleased that the president of our association is here as well, because he and I wrote the training program under the old scheme for the Royal Association of Justices members back in 2005. And so we're familiar with the old scheme and we're very familiar with the new one. And we practice it and we're pleased with it. But I've come across recently, and I work in the courts as an on-duty justice, and we get many members or many public people coming along and wanting us to witness their documents. And over the years, I know I've done hundreds of them, and I know my fellow member has done the same, and most of the other justices. What has been brought to my notice recently by some of my old, I'll call them customers, is that when they've been going to admit themselves into hospital, and I'm not talking palliative care or major aspects, they're being asked about advanced care directives, and it's great. But what they're telling me, and I've been receiving phone calls about it, is the actual clerk, when they have said they've got advanced directives, in other words, enduring power of guardianship, medical, etc., that they're no good anymore. You have to have them on the new forms. Now, at this point in time, that's a very dangerous thing, and it's causing untold stress to the patient or the would-be patient, because suddenly they're supposed to be booking in the hospital, and now they're being told their legal documents are no good anymore by the admittance clerk. And so they're rushing out, and then they're told, look, it's only $5 to go and buy a new one. Yeah, but it's not the $5, it's the fact that they're being given the wrong information at the floor. And you can't blame, I'm not saying the person is doing it deliberately, they obviously haven't been informed correctly and in writing, so they don't make that mistake. Because the majority of the public, they have trouble filling out the form themselves, and they go to solicitors. And the new forms, they're being charged $250, $350, $800 to submit a new form. And this is untold, unnecessary pressure and stress on the public. And I've contacted the Queen Elizabeth 2 weeks ago to talk about the problem, and after 6 different extensions, I was shunted from pillar to post and referred to the RAH.
Could I just stop you there, because this is a problem we...
All I'm saying is, can somebody follow it through to stop this unnecessary direction? And I'm not blaming the clerk trying to book you in. I'm saying it's a policy matter and it should be corrected.
That is policy. That doesn't mean that people read the policy, and that's a problem, and we've got to get them to do it. I mean, the policy is they should know this stuff. Okay, I was part of it, and I'm not even working for SA Health, but I can tell you now, as part of it, I've seen the documents. They're supposed to know it. But you know what? Does everybody here read everything? Correct. The problem is we have a fundamental problem, but I'll hand over to Lee there.
If it's particular hospitals, if you want to tell me which hospitals it is, we can follow that up, see if we can... Any apart from the Queen Elizabeth?
The Queen Elizabeth said it should be the RAH that do it, because they work across the whole state.
So Chris, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment, because we've had the same experience with lawyers as well, but I think they make a point in that if you're a well person and you're writing an advanced care directive, put down the things that are important to you, as we saw in the one that was shown. What's important in your life? Please do not put particular medical treatments in your advanced care directive, because you actually don't know what might happen to you in the future and what's going to be relevant and what isn't. And that's what I've heard lawyers saying, and telling not to refuse certain things because you actually don't know what's ahead. If you're a person who already has an advanced illness of a particular kind, you may know something about what's likely to happen to you, and then it might be relevant to put certain things down. No, I don't want dialysis if my kidney function gets even worse, because I expect that's going to happen. You know, that sort of thing, make it relevant to yourself. And that's in answer to your question. We don't know, many of us don't know what's relevant to us yet. We just know what's important to us. Yeah. No. Yep. Exactly. No. Yep.
I'm actually going to go upstairs, because I don't think we've got to be fair to the people upstairs, and there's a question from up there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This is primarily for Gaynor, I think. You mentioned much earlier, Chris, about people who've got their wishes on 5 different pieces of paper. So my aunt has dementia, she's in a nursing home, she can't make her own decisions now. It's quite clear that my sister and I are her decision makers, we're her guardians, that's been through the public trustees, that's not in question. However, her wishes, there's some of it in her guardianship papers, there's a do not resuscitate form in her purse. There's bits and pieces everywhere, And once upon a time, I used to find that as a guardian, the hospital would just say, what do you think she wants us to do? And I'd say, and it'd be done. And now they say, have you got Section 32 powers? I think, oh, well, not for this, I don't know. So how do we get my aunt's expressed wishes, they're in writing, how do we get them onto her My Health record so that when she goes from the nursing home to the hospital and before we turn up at the hospital, her wishes are known and clear? I don't think that would be a rare situation for older people who are likely to be in this situation.
Yeah, this is a tricky area because I think the first thing is if they're on all these documents, their legal standing is difficult because I don't know what the individuals who wrote it, whether they're signed or witnessed by the individual. A refusal that's signed and witnessed by an individual actually does have legal standing. If you say you don't want something done, it doesn't. But the problem is it's difficult to work out where it stands. The next thing is that I think that the ACD can only be completed by somebody who's a decision-making capacity, so that's your problem at this moment in time. I think the thing to do, the best we've got at the moment, I think, ideally in South Australia, is to try and have a meeting and everybody try to make the decision that the individual would have wanted based on all the bits of paper there and try and transfer it to a 7-step pathway at that point, if possible, if it's a matter of resuscitation and those issues. Because that's your best chance, I think, because that would give clear instructions to those things, because that one doesn't require. Okay, that's a doctor trying to synthesise it into something which is actually going to be useful at the end, but putting in all the things, and everybody should be trying to do what the individual would have wanted.
We leave out the ADC and go from her multiple pieces of paper to a clinical pathways.
Yep.
Because she is elderly and frail, and clinical pathways are a reasonable thing to do. And then that goes on her My Health record, and that should simplify. That sounds good.
Yep. I might just hand over a question to here. Thank you.
Two quick things. In the absence of any current disease or anything else, what I've done is create a whole lot of threshold questions for my children to ask the clinician. So they are sort of general but specific, if you like. The other thing I wanted to say was you talked briefly about the purple package for GPs. Can you give us a bit more information about that and how that works?
This is actually a part of the GP Shared Care program. It's a program to try and get GPs to work with palliative care specialists a little bit better out in the community, because there has been this sort of dichotomy and kind of two services not working together, and we want everybody working as a team. And so one aspect of this was to try and bring the paperwork at the crunch point that's required into one thing, so everybody's got it there. So when everybody's got it there who comes and sees the individual, but also particularly in the middle of the night, you can get all those documents in the one spot. It's a bit of it's a signal that this is individuals for palliation. Yeah. Sorry, I'll go there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So sorry, a lot of hands up at the moment.
In the event that I outlived my offspring, which heaven forbid, where does it revert to?
I might hand over to Lee. So they've got the ACD, you mean?
Well, they will.
They're a substitution maker.
Yes.
So you've outlived them and they're a substitution maker. So what happens then?
Well, if the substitute decision makers aren't available,
Or does it revert to a public?
So I mean, what we'd do is look for whatever remaining substitute makers, but we'd also look at whatever wishes you might have written there, because they're still valid. They would still be valid. But in an ideal world, you would then actually probably redo another advanced care directive, which would actually supersede that previous one.
Right. Or
you may not be mentally capable of
that. Exactly. But all you can do is do the best you can with what you got.
Yeah.
Because it's too late to do it anyway.
Sorry, if you've got the ACD still, the hospitals will use the person responsible to make decisions about your care, etc. So it won't be your substitute decision makers, it'll be whoever else is left and is closest to you.
But the wishes, on that consent hierarchy, the wishes would still outrank. If the wishes were relevant in situation, they would outrank the person responsible.
Right.
Because you don't know who they are really. You haven't spent the time to appoint them, so we won't. They still outrank them.
Okay,
sorry, could I go? This gentleman there had a question. Had his hand up. Nick, I'll come to you, Alex.
Hi there, Tony Sangstrom, a healthcare consumer. The glitch I see is in assessment of decision-making capacity, because you're asking not only doctors but lawyers, veterinary surgeons, all sorts of people to sign or say that the person is competent. and that they have requisite capacity. 20 years ago, after the death of a family friend in hospital and the subsequent coroner's inquiry, I sort of and since then done a personal journey at looking at decision-making capacity and how it's assessed. And what I've found is that there is very little or nothing here in Australia. For example, APRA, which is the federal registry body for health professionals, doesn't, and in the medical section particularly, doesn't have any care, sort of a practice code for how you assess decision-making capacity. As far as I know, and having looked at this as much as I can, and obviously not being quite up to date, there's no undergraduate or comprehensive postgraduate tuition in this. You have the Consent to Treatment and Palliative Care Act back in 1997. It says in there that if there's a dispute or legal dispute, then it goes on what part of that will be on what the profession's particular practice is, and there is nothing there. There's nothing at ACT as well.
Can I just correct you on that? I think the Advanced Care Directives Act actually does enshrine decision-making capacity.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying the assessment of it.
No, I get it. And the thing, let me put it to you this way. Okay, I'll give you some. I mean, look, it's not for me to decide decision-making capacity. Other people to decide that, but. I agree with you, it's a touch point, because first up, people don't understand it, and that's not just people out there, but it's doctors as well. That's the first thing. I actually do think that we override decision-making capacity too quickly. Okay, they've got dementia, they can't decide anything. That's not true. A lot of people with dementia can make decisions. The actual general understanding of decision-making capacities, I think, actually pretty clear. It's actually, you presume it first, and you've got to prove it can't. So you start from a position they've got decision-making capacity. That's innocent until proven guilty, and then you've got to break down one of those four things. And it's relevant to the decision that's in front of you, and it's got to be temporal as well. You've got to take in the fact that it could be fluctuating. That's all you can do. There is actually the New South Wales. There's a New South Wales toolkit, which is about the closest thing we've got. And then after that, you probably have to go to a psychiatrist or a neurologist to maybe do an assessment. But that's all you can do. But the problem is that's impractical in real world. But I do agree that there's a serious issue with that, because I actually do think there's actually an issue of elder abuse out there, where people are actually overriding people's decision-making capacity, like, oh, we're going to sell your home because you haven't got decision-making capacity.
In fact, can I just butt in here? I went to the 4th National Elder Abuse Conference the other day, and I heard this terrible phrase, and it was called inheritance, well, the word for speeding it up, I've lost it now, but it was actually inheritance. No, they were actually accelerated inheritance. They were actually that's what they were trying to do. Inheritance impatience. That's what they said. They said that they are seeing more and more inheritance impatience, which is a dreadful concept, isn't it?
Christine.
Can I go to your comment? Can I reassure you that there is more and more emphasis on this, certainly in the hospital system. I don't know what's happening out in general practice, but I certainly know in the hospital system there's more and more emphasis on ensuring that all clinicians understand the concept. The other thing is, it's not a global concept of decision making. It's around one single decision. So every time a nurse goes to do something, they need consent. Every time we do something, even give a tablet, we need to have consent from that person. So what Chris said about assuming that they have consent and needing evidence to show a person hasn't is really important. Now, the dementia case is a very important one, because a person may have very clear decision-making capacity around some things, but around others not. So you go with what you can get, and you facilitate it and support it the best you can. So somebody with dementia, for example, we're learning more and more. If we've got a decision that can be made in the morning, not in an emergency, when that person's likely to be at their best, then that's when we need to do it. Not wait till late in the day when that person can no longer do it. It's those sort of concepts. The 4 steps are being reiterated and emphasised a lot.
Well, I do have a quibble with those 4 steps. I think there's one missed out.
What's that?
Okay, this goes on what I've read from American literature, and it's from 2 psychiatrists, Grizzo and Applebaum. and what they looked at was schizophrenic patients who, obviously, mental illness and therefore there's some concerns. And what they pointed out was that, yes, they had to be alert, they had to have an understanding, be able to say back to you in their own words what they're supposed to understand. But then they talked about appreciation. What they meant by that was that the person understands that this is about them. They're not in a state where they don't have the insight to understand this is about them. They could perfectly understand that somebody that has these things would need this operation. And from what I can see, there's no emphasis in the English literature. There is in the American, but not in the English literature about that. And we've got to remember that it's not just mental health care patients that need that assessment, it's other people, because mental illness does affect other people.
I must stop you there, because I think what you're saying is, I think I can accept that. But one thing you've got to keep in mind, this has got to be workable 24 hours a day on a ward by people that aren't trained, that have to do it every time they give somebody a tablet. And that's the problem with something like this. And the reason why those 4 things actually do work, because they're actually pretty basic. We have to get away from people thinking that a mini mental test is a test of it. It's rubbish. We have to get away from that sort of stuff and teach people that you have to be able to break down those 4 things in decision-making capacity. And I've already talked to Lee about the fact that there's a legislation that we're looking at, and I think we need to put it in the paperwork that people have to fill out to actually do the test if it's something serious. So I'll hand over to Alex here. Have we got Alex?
Oh, sorry.
I think we're nearly there.
So firstly, thank you to all the panel members, because it's fantastic. And in terms of the personal stories that came through, and Chris, what you were talking about in terms of clinicians having that dilemma when they're faced with these really difficult choices, it seems like good outcomes happen not just when there's an advanced care directive, but when the people that are advocating on that person's behalf have quite a high level of health literacy. And I guess coming into your example, Chris, of all of the things that happen when a clinician is trying to make these decisions, what does the panel think about the current support for substitute decision makers, and if this is an area that maybe things are falling down in terms of the translation between someone's wishes and their self-determination and what actually happens when we get into hospital.
Any takers on this one? Alison.
Look, I think, my view, and certainly the conversations I've had with my family members, is it's important that they are informed and assertive users of health services. And sometimes that's easier for me. It's easy to work your way through a large system when you know how that system operates. And it's easier to know who to have the conversations with and how to be clear about those things. It's also easy to appreciate the level of concern and anxiety that health practitioners have about making sure that the information they're getting from family members and support people is true and credible, and they're doing the right thing. And I think that's often where health practitioners balk at that. One of the things for me was I was the only person at the time visiting my father, because the rest of my family found that extremely difficult for different reasons. And I had a conversation initiated by the medical registrar who said, it's always a concern when we only hear from one family member, because the reality is they were concerned that there potentially would be different views and problems in the future. So I think it's really important to be really clear about what you want, and that everybody has a right as a consumer of health services to ask the hard questions and expect to be informed. And part of what I've sort of talked to my family is, if you in arms and you'd be a really assertive user of the supermarket, you should think of your health services the same way. You have a right and you need to be. I certainly had to be clear and assertive about the role of my father's advanced care directive, and that it was in place, and I expected them to respect that. and that they had a legal obligation to do that. But once we'd had that conversation, there were no qualms about it, but I did have to emphasise it. I'm unsure whether other members of my family would have been able to do that.
I think you made a really good point, though, that I've got two brothers and you're a nurse, and you know the people that are chosen up here are in that way. I do think you may need a simpler form than the one that's out at the moment, because it would be very off-putting to people that were not highly literate or understanding it, all of it. So maybe we do actually need to think about the average Jack and Jill out there who haven't got a high standard of literacy. I mean, they did a survey recently, and I'll use this against Tasmania, but they said that something like half the population in Tasmania were functionally illiterate. So I mean, this was because a lot of these forms are putting people off. I mean, so how do you actually have that very high level discussion about life and death issues, fill out a form and get all the people to sit around the table and do it who actually don't have that level of either knowledge or literacy? And I think that is a huge challenge to make it simpler for ordinary people to understand. You know, a bit like the Rupert Murdoch thing. It should be his newspapers were pitched at a 12-year-old or something, apparently, weren't they? Because he wanted people to buy the newspapers and read them. And if you pitch information as if you're a health professional, then people are probably going to steer away from it. That's just a thought.
I would like to just put to you, I mean, I've been sounded almost hard against my colleagues, but I haven't actually. I'm trying to indicate to you that it is actually really difficult being a doctor sometimes. And I think the first thing to say is I don't think it's a matter of actually just consumer literacy. It's actually doctor literacy on these issues as well, and it's actually a big issue. But today we've started. I mean, today what I've said to you is you appoint a substitute maker, they've got one job, to be that person. That's a pretty simple start. So if you can send that message out there, that's a big start. And that's the way you're supposed to act. Okay. Sorry, one more question, I think. So my apologies, I think we've got one there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
My name's Jeremy Moore, and I was the president of the Guardianship Board, and I was a lawyer for a long time, and am a lawyer. And there's a few things that have been said today which are a worry. One, it's really important, those enduring powers of guardianship, they came in 1993, and all the lawyers at that time, when they had them, they had these things which were new, and they had medical powers of attorney at the same time. We would ask our clients what they wanted. We'd talk about all the things they could put in there, and it became apparent that they'd take the forms home and they'd put them in the bottom drawer and it'd go nowhere. And it was out of that the outcome came about, that lawyers would say, look, for God's sake, just pick someone you trust to be your substitute decision maker. We called them guardians in those days. And that way we got a lot of people who have signed up to those forms, and it's sad to hear that in the hospital system, I don't know who's to blame for it, but something needs to be done instantly, not later. It's got to be done straight away. There are thousands and thousands of those enduring powers of guardianship out there, and they do exactly the same thing. You pick someone to make a decision for you. For God's sake, fix it. Just make it happen. I've signed or created hundreds of them. I've been an enduring guardian, understand the rules, and if we could have those 21 years of all of those enduring guardianship, if they are used, we've got a lot more people in the community who've got someone who can make decisions for them. And thank you very much for listening for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, there was one other.
You agree?
Yes, I agree.
Would you do something about it?
Can I just say something? I don't work for SA Health. I do this for free.
Okay.
And I've actually been your advocate for a long time. In fact, we set up the policy on this issue. I would like you to kick the pressure up on this issue. One more question at the back, because that was the question we were trying to get to.
I just want to know, with this Carers Directive, how much information have you got to put in through to Aboriginal legal rights for the literacy advantage of Aboriginal people?
Yep. I might hand that over. What have we done on that side of things? I haven't been involved in any of that, I'm afraid, with Indigenous groups and...
Yeah. There is a specific brochure for Aboriginal people that was essentially designed with Aboriginal people early on, who said that essentially advanced care directives should prove very useful in terms of, after a person's death, sorting out who would have responsibility and what different people would do. Apart from the specific brochure, which reiterates the information that's in the other brochure, there isn't any Indigenous specific forms or anything like that.
I do know, by the way, that Palliative Care Australia is doing a project at the moment which is looking at specifically rural and remote areas to do with Aboriginal people, and I know that they're designing a process at the moment through Flying Doctor Service at Port Augusta and other locations around Australia, specifically around some of the particular issues involved in Aboriginal health and advanced care directives, and they're doing a pilot study at the moment where when people come in, they're going to spend time talking to the family members about what will actually happen. So I could provide you with some more information about that, but in terms of what's happening in Adelaide itself, I'm not sure.
And I was aware there was a paper about this somewhere, and it was incorporated into, I think, a document about palliative care. Look, again, I don't work for SA Health, so I see these documents sometimes. People send them to me. But I saw this document, so I think there was some discussion about it. But look, it's a serious issue. It's an important issue because the issues there in terms of who's going to make the decisions and the things that happen are obviously very different from a cultural point of view. And
but the level of high information in regarding Aboriginal interpreters to set up some sort of carers directive to come down the same levels up here, CEOs, well, they don't bring out the information to let the people know in the community itself.
Yep. Thank you for bringing that topic up because I do agree with you. I think it's a serious issue.
Relevant to us because 98% of our Aboriginal kids and people are incarcerated, and we can't put these sort of information in because we've got nowhere to go, even though we've got an Aboriginal service that should provide and care for us. And this is the main issue.
Thank you. I've heard enough of my own voice and probably, not probably these people, but my own voice. So I might hand over to Kathy now. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Kathy Micken. I'm the Manager of Consumer Engagement at HCA, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers and panellists tonight for their words of wisdom and information and encouragement for us to take action. I think the presentations were all really informative and also challenging and inspiring, so thank you for that. And thanks also to Judy for hosting the speakers and for Chris for hosting the panel. And I'd also like to thank the members of our team of HCA staff. I think everybody on our team has put input into making today happen, so thank you for that, for your time and for your professionalism. I'd also like to thank our partners, Adelaide Primary Health Network and SA Health, for sponsoring this event. Without you, it would have been very difficult for us as a small organisation to put this on, so thanks for that. You will find that there are evaluation forms on your chair. They should take you about 1 minute maybe to complete. We like to do things well at HCA, so the only way we're going to know whether we're doing it well is if you give us feedback, and that also helps us to do better next time. Ellie and Ellen are standing down the back, and they will take your evaluation forms as you leave the door. Yeah, that's it. That's your exit pass. A copy of a report will be made on today's event, and we'll include the presentations. So they will be circulated to everybody who has registered for today's event. The video we will have edited. It may take us a number of weeks to make that happen, but once we have got that happening, we will make it available on our website for people to access, and we will promote that in our e-news so that everybody knows that that's available. And finally, I'd like to thank our speakers and panellists again for providing us with some really great foundations for the discussions and conversations that we'll need to have in our own lives and the action that we need to take. I think that includes conversations that maybe we can have with our GP about my health record as well as about advanced care directives. And yeah, I think the discussions can be challenging, and not everybody's going to get on board up front, but I think that we can continue to have those conversations. I know that I've had them in my family, and my parents aren't ready to go there yet, and one of them's already 80, so I've got a bit of a battle on my hands with getting him to understand the importance of it. But I think if we focus on the fact that advanced care directives are a matter of love and rights and self-determination, then that's what's going to bring people around. So thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your evening.